granniopteryx, granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello. I regret to say I have to return to the subject of Jason Arday. I thought I'd done enough on that subject, but now, as was predictable, I suppose, there's the woke backlash, discharging in torrents like a fire hose in full jet that some incompetent fire officer dropped, and it's whipping about, drenching anyone within reach with random cascades of accusations, recriminations, libels, and of course the usual racist dousings, which are being particularly aimed at Dr. Nathan Coffness, the guy who blew the whistle the loudest and who doesn't help his own case by having some very controversial theories about the hereditary aspects of intelligence. Also, by being Jewish, which has recently become the equivalent of walking around with a post-it note on your back saying, "Kick me." And finally, and possibly the most damning of all, it just so happens that Coffness looks and talks exactly like that character in the TV puppet show Thunderbirds. You know, Brains. The resemblance is so remarkable that sometimes when I see him talking, I can almost see the strings. Anyway, enough of Coffness and on to our day. This morning, a vision came softly creeping and left its seeds while I was sleeping. Well, actually, that's not true. I was brushing my teeth at the time, but it doesn't rhyme in quite the same way. Whatever, I was suddenly struck by an image. Do you remember this? When it first started circulating, I do remember a couple of things occurred to me about it, but I wasn't making YouTube videos at the time and I kept the thoughts to myself. But yes, I definitely had my doubts about a few points in that illustration. The first was that whoever had created it had chosen to depict three people who, in the USA at least, would constitute an ethnic minority, instantly disarming any criticism of it. I was also quite impressed by the number of woke cues, although at the time the word woke wasn't going round and I would have used the word propagandist instead. But anyway, I was impressed by the number and clever use of propagandist cues. First of all, these people are brown-skinned and from the way they're dressed, obviously not rich. So how would anyone be so churlish as to suggest that they're watching a baseball game for free while others have paid for their seats? Well, frankly, I wouldn't object to them being there either. How could anyone reasonably object, especially since they're shown to be the only people there and hadn't punched anyone else out of the way to get that position? Which, by the way, is another woke piece of manipulation, because that sort of open space with a good view would probably have been absolutely packed, and there would have certainly been quite a bit of pushing and shoving for such a prime site. All right, leaving that aside, let's look at what the artist is showing. Let's pretend it's reality, should we? And let's approach it like a real-life situation. After all, it's supposed to be an illustration of what an equitable society is really all about. On the left, we have the man who's tall enough to see over the fence without help. So he gives up his box to the smallest one, who otherwise would see only the planks in front of his face. And thereby the smallest one is lifted up high enough to see over the fence and enjoy the game. So what's the problem? Well, you see, it's this. You see how the toddler is cheering and waving his hands about? how long do you estimate that he'd still be standing there on that box before he gets a little bit overexcited, overbalances, and falls over backwards, seriously injuring or even killing himself? Because he stood there on a pile of boxes, unsupported, unable to get down safely without help, and unable to move freely, if he has any sense, because one misstep would lead to disaster. Now, if this were real life, okay, I'm assuming the man on the left is a father and the two smaller ones are his children. So, if this were real life and the father did have 2 kids and 3 boxes, then the toddler would have been, well, lifted up by the father, of course. He would have been placed in the middle, flanked by the father on one side and the older brother on the other side. That would have been the natural way to do it, wouldn't it? And both the father and the brother would have had to hold on to the toddler to make sure he stayed in place on that mini tower. This, well, it might not have been so bad for the father, but what about that older brother? At his young age, instead of being able to devote his attention to the game, much of his attention would have been to the responsibility of keeping his eye and his arm on his younger sibling. And if he'd complained about this, it's likely that his dad would tell him he was being selfish for not wishing to devote his time to looking after his younger brother. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that should never happen. Obviously, older children do look after younger children. But what I am saying is that equity, as illustrated here, isn't all that it's cracked up to be. That baby would need constant support. The older child would be a constant caregiver. And incidentally, the father has just taught both of them that cheating is okay. Well, that's the Our Day story in a nutshell. The father is the academic establishment and the BBC and the James O'Briens of this world. They all put Our Day up there in the first place and supported him up there on his precarious boxes. Even worse, they forced all the students, that is, the older brother in this picture, they forced all the students who were taking classes in the education department, they forced them to collaborate in this support. All the students Our Day was pretending to teach were wasting their academic potential in supporting him from the other side, like that older brother. When a couple of them did complain that they weren't getting the sort of teaching they might have expected from an almus pater, that is, the dad figure, like Cambridge, they were accused of racism, a libel intended to shame them for the rest of their lives. And they all, even the ones who kept quiet, they all paid in money and academic depletion. And this continued until Our Day got so excited by the game and so bloated with self-importance and so sure that he'd be protected, whatever he did, that the two supporters on either side lost control and he came crashing down. So, back to the original illustration. There's another one missing in this sequence, isn't there? It's the picture of the baby on the ground, seriously hurt, while the other two are looking round in shocked horror. The older brother, with this incident colouring the rest of his life, and the father suddenly realising the damage that he did. Think about it. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.